As a member of the John Birch Society and the Convention of States, I have often been at odds kind of with my own self, deciding what is the right thing to do in response to challenges with our federal government. Is there a problem with the Constitution? Do we need to fix the Constitution? Is the problem with time-eroded rights that just slowly get eroded like a great mountain over long periods of time? Or what's going on there? The John Birch Society is very formally in the camp of not using a convention of states to dial back federal power, bring power back to the states, and enact term limits for Congress and maybe even a balanced budget, so on and so forth. There's a lot of different ideas that could be brought forward in a convention of states. The John Birch Society is not in favor of that. They're in favor of just using nullification. Nullification. What is nullification? Having done hours and hours of research on this, I have come to some relative understanding of what nullification is. There's several different kinds. Anyone that tells you that nullification is a simple concept is flat out lying. They are completely dishonest. This is a heavily controversial subject with arguments on both sides, and the answer, the truth, somewhere in the middle. We will delve into this. What is your stance on nullification? This is the treatise on nullification. Let's get into this. Whether for or against it, we need to understand nullification. Nullification has taken on many forms, including declaration of laws being unconstitutional, counter laws set up to those laws, other things of sanctuary cities, or what we today call non-participation. Just all kinds of different things have been done and ultimately, what is it trying to achieve? What are we trying to work towards here? The federal government does something, the states or a single state doesn't like it. What is the remedy and how do we get to that? Now, remember, with our sanctuary cities, we have things like, and this treatise is meant to be for all people, whether Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. This is for everybody, so someone might say, well, I don't like it when those Republicans try to pass Second Amendment sanctuary states and counties. Yeah, but you often are in support of immigration sanctuary cities and counties and states. And that is based on the same legal principle. So before you go saying, I'm not in favor, or before you go saying, I am in favor, let's take a look at this. We've got drug sanctuaries, we've got immigration sanctuaries, we've got Second Amendment sanctuaries, but the concept of a sanctuary city or state or whatever is only part of nullification. There are countering laws, contradicting laws, some laws that we just don't participate in. So what are we going to look at here? Let's get into all of this, take a peek. Now, before we get into our formal discussion of what nullification is, where it came from and all that, whether it's legit or legal, there is a little statement that I need to make, and this is just personal. So I'm going to read this one off because I want to make sure to get it right. So, as of the recording of this treatise, I have not fully resolved my position on nullification. Having researched the subject thoroughly, I was swayed back and forth from endorsing to rejecting and back again to endorsing and back again to rejecting. I can't even say it right there. I was redorsing. Regardless of your current stance, please reserve changing or holding your belief pattern about nullification until the end, whether for or against. Reserve changing it or holding on to it until the end, as it might change in a way that you find different from what you expect. This is what I have come to the conclusion of. And to tell you the truth, I'm not kidding. I have not fully resolved my position. There are times when I go, absolutely, we need to have nullification. And there are times that I go, are you nuts? This is not a good idea. So I still have not fully resolved my position on this, though I will try to be balanced in my approach of understanding it and presenting the facts and information and the arguments for and against. This analysis is going to be broken down into three major components. Part number one, or three major parts. Part number one is going to be the definition, the philosophy, and the purpose of nullification. Where did it come from? What is its purpose? How do we even use it? Where was the first place that it even showed up? That's what we're going to go through in number 1. There's going to be a lot of history involved in this and a lot of legal cases and evolution of legal cases. Part number 2, we're going to get into the origin, history, and evolution. So we'll look at actually where it came from, the very first recorded use of the idea of nullification, and then the history behind it and how it has evolved over the last 250 years of our constitutional republic. Finally, the last part will be broken down into legitimacy, legality, and constitutionality. I call all of those separate because legit isn't quite legal and neither one are quite constitutional. So I broke those ones all apart. Also, we'll talk about where it's effective, where it isn't effective, and just ultimately some other things to think about. So this is part 1. Let's take a look at definition, philosophy, and purpose. Here we go. What is the definition of nullification? This is not jury nullification. We are not talking about jury nullification. Jury nullification is where someone gets caught doing a crime. They get arraigned before a judge and a jury. The prosecution presents all the facts. There's no question someone is completely, we'll call him Bob. Bob did something and he is completely guilty. They've got video evidence. They've got audio evidence. They've got witnesses. I mean, Bob's admitted it. There's no question he's guilty, but the law is bad. And if the law is bad, the jury can just say, you know what, he's not guilty. And it doesn't matter how much evidence is against Bob. If the law is bad, the jury can just say that's a bad law, so we're going to vote not guilty. That's called jury nullification. Completely legal, completely legitimate. Now the judge will tell the jury, you have to rule according to the law. You don't have to do nothing, that judge says. You can go in, and if it's a bad law, let's say there's a law, you can't spit your gum on the ground. I don't know. That actually is in Singapore. But let's pretend, outside of the idea of littering, you can't spit your gum on the ground. Bob spit his gum. We saw it, but they go, you know what? That law really restricts personal freedom. Now, we can debate whether it does. That's not the point. But let's say that we all agree that our politicians made a stupid law and they said that law violates personal freedom. Bob, you are not guilty because we think the law is bad. That's called jury nullification. That is not what we're talking about here. So we're talking about nullification, a level of government stepping in on behalf of a citizen or a person. I'm going to actually not talk so much about citizens. I'm going to talk about people. Citizens have more rights in our country than people do, but a person has a lot of rights in this country, which I believe is correct. Now, I believe citizens should have more, but people, a person, should have some basic rights, life, liberty. There should be some basic rights that everyone has simply because you're a human being, or as the scriptures put it, a child or a descendant of the family of Adam, son of Adam or a daughter of Eve, however you like to look at it. We should have rights. So let's take a look at this. So this is talking about government nullification. So a form of government stepping in on behalf of another form. Before we define nullification, we have to get a couple of points across. Number 1, people or a person has rights. Government has no rights. Government has never had rights. Governments have sovereignty. It is important to distinguish these because if you start to confuse these and go, well, the government, gives the right or the privilege for this or that or the other thing. Driving's a good example. You do not have a right to drive. You have a privilege to drive, but you have a right to freely move about. So you can freely move, but you're not entitled to drive. That's a privilege. The government can revoke the driving privilege. It cannot revoke the right of you to move about unless you have violated other criminal code, at which point we can fine you in a jail. So people, and then not people, because that goes, okay, well, the whole group has rights. No. An individual, a person has rights. People have rights. Governments have sovereignty. Governments are instituted by people to protect rights. People must sacrifice some of their rights to the government in order to protect the bulk majority of individual rights. So this is an interesting concept. So I'm going to put an image up here, a graph up on the screen. Now, for those of you who are listening to this on the podcast, I'm going to describe this graph so you can see it in your mind, because it's really important. So it's a two-dimensional graph, bar graph, right? So it's got a left column and a bottom line. So the left line is your vertical line going up and down. The bottom is your horizontal line. So in the lower left corner, that's 0.00. We're going to pretend this is like a graph. And I know some of you are going, oh no, not math. I know math is the other four-letter word, but I promise, unless you're a Brit, and then maths is a five-letter word. Which England, why do you put S's on everything? No, I'm just kidding. England, we love you guys. You guys are awesome. You're our brothers in arms, our former mother country. I know we duked it out a couple of times, but you know what? We love you guys, and we're thankful for your companionship these days. But we're looking at a graph. So 0, is in the lower left corner. The left side goes, and I'm going to call that minimum. The left side goes from minimum to maximum. Now the value on it is 8. So it goes from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 is not important. It's not a value that means anything. But that's the left side. The bottom side goes from minimum 0 to maximum 10. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 10. The left side, we're going to call the amount of individual rights you have. That's the vertical component. So the lower the vertical component, the lower the individual rights that you have, okay? So 8, or max, would be the maximum of personal sovereignty, or personal rights, personal freedoms, liberty. You could do whatever you want. That would be the max. 0 would obviously be the minimum personal rights. That's where you have no rights. You're bound up, wrapped up with duct tape. You can't do nothing, and you're going to die. All right, so then on the bottom, which is the bottom of this two-dimensional graph, that is quantity of rights surrendered to the government. So at 0, you've surrendered no rights to the government. We're total anarchy. And at 10, you've surrendered all the rights to the government. That's a total despotism, right? So we've got personal liberty, personal rights on the vertical column, quantity of rights surrendered to the government on the horizontal column, and we're going to graph a line between those two. So here you'll see a dotted line that starts in the upper left corner, up there at the max of personal liberty. So you have the maximum number of personal rights. There's no government. You can do whatever you want. You want to go next door and shoot the guy, you can. You want to drive on any side of the road, you can. There are no laws, no government, no anything. Maximum rights is in the upper left corner. Then this line steadily decreases down to the lower right-hand corner. So it goes from upper left to lower right, diagonal down. As it goes down, the theory is we're surrendering rights to the government. Because under total anarchy, even though you have maximum personal rights, you have minimum personal protection. So let's take a look at this next graph, which graphs personal protection against surrendered personal rights to the government. And you'll notice that as the personal rights begin to be surrendered to the government, there is a rapid maximum climb of personal protection. But then as we continue to surrender rights, that kind of peaks, personal protection peaks, and then personal protection begins to fall off. So at the left-hand side of the government, that would be total anarchy. You could do whatever you want. You want to go next door and kill your neighbor? You can. There are no laws. But you have minimum personal protection. The only protection is what you can do yourself. There's no government. The government can't protect you. All the way on the right-hand side, you've surrendered all your rights. There is no rights. You have no personal rights. And because you have no personal rights, there's nothing worth protecting. You have no personal protection. That is a complete despotism, or a complete despotic ruler, an emperor, an iron fist. He can kill you, take your property, do whatever he wants, take your wife, take your children, sell them into slavery, sell them on the sex trafficking slaves, market. Can do whatever he wants, no consequences to him or her, whoever's running the country. That would be a maximum surrender. And at that, you have no personal protection there either. So the question is, where's the balance? Where do you get the most protection for the least amount of rights surrendered to the government? So let's take a look at the next one. So there's a little circle here where the surrendered rights and the protection line cross each other for the first time. It's where you have surrendered the least amount of rights to get the most amount of protection. That's the important thing. I've circled it in blue on my graph here. Those of you watching this on the video can see that. Those of you listening on the podcast, I want you to understand that it is two opposing curves. How little can we give up to get the most return? Now, this point is not hard to find. This is not an equation that you just plug in, I put in this law and that law, and boom, we get it. This is not hard to find. This is a soft definition where we all have to get together and decide, how much do we give up? Do we have social programs? Don't we have social programs? If you give up social programs, you give up some rights, but then you also get more protection. So where is the line there? Hey, I was the recipient of some social programs when I had a massive medical stay, a massive medical thing. In fact, my family started calling me the $3 million man because that's what I spent in the hospital. And I still have some outstanding hospital bills from that I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I take care of these? So where is the benefit? Where is the benefit to cost analysis in liberty, in personal freedom, giving up rights to a sovereign government in exchange for protection? That's what we're looking at here. So now that we understand the concept of giving up rights to receive protection, yielding some of our rights to a sovereign government in exchange for mutual protection for all of us, now that we understand that, let's go ahead and talk about nullification, because let's pretend for a minute we've got our point, and we've got laws, we've got a government, and it's protecting us. We've given up some rights, but we've got most of our rights intact. Now let's talk about levels of government. Used to be, remember, all the way on the right, despotic ruler. He was it. He was the government. That was it. We've learned that that's not a good thing. In fact, we've learned in modern society the best form of government is to constantly push decisions to the lowest level possible. The larger an area you try to service with the law, the worse that it does as a job overall, because you're trying to homogenize lots of different areas, people, cultures, ideas, importances, philosophies, religions, creeds, everything. It gets very complicated. There are some things that we have to defend at a national level. Defense is obvious. That is an obvious point. What else needs to be handled there? But let's take a look at this graph right here. So I'm showing another graph. This is a one-dimensional vertical graph, 0 at the bottom, 8 at the top. The bottom is labeled, for those of you on the podcast, bottom is labeled local, meaning local government, the government most local to you. At the very top, it's labeled big or national or central or whatever. Big government, the government farthest away from you. And so let's talk about that in descending order. The biggest government. Now someone will say, what about international governments and treaties? Okay, I left that out because I didn't want to get into dealing with that. So let's start at the top of this list and work our way down. The largest form of government, the most distant, is the federal government, Congress, the EPA, the FBI, the Supreme Court, anybody like that. And when I say Supreme Court, I mean the capital T, the Supreme Court of the United States. I mean, that is the highest level of government. Okay, that's where all that takes place. So the next step down is going to be like your state government. That's the next closest level of government. Still quite a bit of ways away compared to other forms of government. But there you have like plumbing requirements, electrical requirements, big things like that. Maybe even like some state police, stuff like that. That's the next layer down. So below that is your county government. How is your county government set up? Do you have commissioners? Do you have a county president? What, an executive? What do you have? But that's going to be your county. Your health districts are usually at the county or semi-multi-county level. A few other things like that. But that's generally where you're going to find that land use, what you're able to do with your land. And you can look up in the cards there for describing land use and how counties work. Those are for the state of Idaho. It's not too different for a lot of states, but that kind of gives you a general idea. The next one below that, so this is on the scale of 0 to 8. This is getting down to about 3.5-ish for those of you on the podcast. The next one is your city. That's going to be, the municipality that you live in, or roads in your water districts. You may have local highway districts. Sometimes those are administered by the county, but your water districts, if you've got, pumped water or something, or irrigation, that's going to be those kind of things. It's going to be at the city level. That's the next closest form of government to you. Then below that, we have like school boards or homeowners associations, HOAs. Those are all forms of government. That's where it's smaller than the city. It's more local. It's closer to you. And it helps you to administer things at a local level. Then the most local government is what I like to call your laundry room or your kitchen. That is your most local level of government. Those of you guys, your wife comes in and says, "Hey, get these dishes done over here." And you're like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to go get the dishes done." That is your most local form of government. Husband's over there telling, "Honey, get the laundry done. I got no skimpy drawers to wear." Right? That's your most local form. So again, we go federal government, Congress, Supreme Court, states, that's your other things, county, city, school boards, HOAs, and then your own personal family in your home. That's how government gets closer and closer to you. So what is nullification? Well, let's talk a little bit about this real fast. In this hierarchy of government, when a level of government impinges upon a person's rights, or in some cases, a citizen's rights, if it's a citizen, when a level of government impinges upon a citizen's right, it is incumbent upon another level of government to interpose to protect the rights of the citizen. Remember, governments are instituted by people to protect rights. That's the whole point. So if one level of government, HOA or the state or the county or the feds, impinges, or in other words, disregards the rights of a person or a citizen, it is incumbent on another position of government, another level of government, to interpose on that person's behalf. If the interposing level of government is superior to the infringing level of government, so for example, if your HOAs, your homeowners associations, are infringing upon your rights and you go to the state or to the city for a remedy to be rectified or to have redress of grievance, that's called an appeal. We get that very commonly in like what we call an appeal to the Supreme Court or to a federal court or to a circuit court. They go, "Oh, well, I didn't like the judgment I got. I'm going to appeal." That's where you go up the chain. You're going higher. You're going from local to bigger, to more distant. When the bigger form of government protects you from the more local form of government, that's called an appeal. So what is nullification? We finally get to this point. All of this background is to get to what is nullification. Here is the definition I have come up with. This is my definition. It does not exist and you won't find it anywhere else. I have come up with this. I like it. Tell me if you think this is right. Let me know in the comments below. Go ahead and tell me. Or if you think I'm wrong, tell me. But here is what my definition of nullification is, and I'm going to read it for you. So I'll look away from the camera here for just a second. Nullification. If the interposing level of government is inferior to the impinging level of government, so in other words, if the level of government trying to protect your rights from an encroachment is more local than the one that is doing the encroachment, the one that's impinging, the one that's trying to put you in jail or charge you a fine. If the saving level is more local, that is called nullification. It was modeled by an ancient American civilization 2,000 years ago for about 100 years. They had kings. One of the kings, all the sons refused the kingship, so he set up a new form of government, and it worked for about 100 years. Let's go ahead and read. This was the manner of their law. This is coming from the book of Mosiah, chapter 29, verses 28 and 29. It says the following. And now if ye have judges, and they do not judge you according to the law which has been given, ye can cause that they may be judged of a higher judge. That's appeal. If your local judges don't judge you correctly, you can go to a higher judge. But look at verse 29. If your higher judges do not judge righteous judgments, ye shall cause that a small number of your lower judges should be gathered together, and they shall judge your higher judges according to the voice of the people. That's called nullification, when a more local form of government interposes on your behalf to protect you from a higher level of government. That's called nullification. So appeal is going up, getting bigger. Nullification is going down, getting smaller. And that's the important difference. All right, so when talking about nullification, it is necessary to assume its veracity and legitimacy. However, I am only going to do that for this deconstruction. So if anything I say during this podcast or this video makes it sound as though I am completely in support of nullification, right now I'm letting you know that is not true. I am neither for it nor against it. I have not fully resolved my position. Ultimately, I'm going to leave that decision up to you as to, when we're all done with this treatise, as to whether or not you support it or not. But I do want you to understand that in order to talk about nullification, you have to assume its legitimacy, and I will assume the legitimacy for the definition and the deconstruction of nullification. But I want to be clear that that is only for the purpose of discussion, not an actual position that I carry. One might well say I am a nullification agnostic. Agnostic's got such a bad word these days. All it means is you don't know. People go, "Oh, are you an agnostic?" That's not bad. I've got a brother who's agnostic. I mean, for heaven's sakes, agnostic just means you don't know. We would be in a much better place in this world if people admitted when they didn't know things, rather than everybody having an opinion on stuff they have no clue about. I mean, if someone would just say, I just don't know, man, we would be in a lot better position. But for some reason, we all have to feel like we need to be the experts and give everyone advice that we are clearly unqualified to give advice on. So a quick interlude right here. I'm wearing my Polaris shirt. By the way, Polaris, hashtag not a sponsor, but I'm open to the option. Love those guys. I used to work for Four Wheel Parts, which was actually was for Transamerican, which was a subsidiary of Four Wheel Parts and Polaris. Fantastic company. Love their stuff. Do aftermarket truck and Jeep parts and all kinds of other fun things. But anyways, I used to work for them, and they gave us all these shirts when they were allowed to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange for the first time. So shout out to Polaris. Great company. Sure love those guys. And sorry that I'm not able to work for them now. So here's my definition of nullification. I know I said I gave the definition earlier. That was kind of the beginning to it, the idea of what I was trying to do. Here's my definition of nullification right over here. Take a look. Nullification, an inferior level of government interposing in some way on behalf of a person whose rights have been impinged upon in some way by a superior level of government. Okay, so that means an inferior level of government. So state versus fed, city versus county versus state, city versus county, so on and so forth. Interposing, meaning getting in between, defending you from an impingement or an infringement upon your rights from a superior level of government, a larger form of government. This is highly controversial. This is my definition. You won't find it anywhere else. This is my definition, but this is the one after hours of research that I believe is correct. An inferior level of government interposing in some way. So whether it's by law or just fact, setting up troops around your house, whatever it takes, an inferior level of government interposing in some way on a person's behalf, on behalf of a person whose rights have been impinged upon in some way by a superior level of government. That is what nullification is defined as. What is the purpose? The purpose of nullification. You go, well, what's the difference between purpose and definition? So there's the definition, what nullification is. What does it do? The purpose of nullification is to alter the execution of law or change the law. So in other words, the law is written and then you feel it in your life. How you feel law and the way that works in your life, nullification is designed to alter that. It alters the execution of law in your life. Or even better, it changes the law. It puts enough pressure on the right people to change the law. Good example of this these days is drugs. Several states started with marijuana and ultimately decriminalized marijuana. That is a form of nullification, where this state just comes out and says, federal government, we're not going to participate in your marijuana laws anymore. That is nullification. If enough states do that, it will put pressure on the federal government to rescind its laws regarding marijuana usage in the United States. So there's federal laws, there's state laws. You can be charged with both, but now the states are saying, we're just not even going to help you out, feds. We're not going to deputize your guys for this. So that ultimately alters the effect of law, alters the execution of law. And if enough states do it, it may actually change the law. So now a little bit more about nullification. Nullification is not codified in law. What does codified mean? Big word, small meaning. It just means there is nowhere in the law that says if a state doesn't like a law, it can nullify. And here's how it does it, blah, 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 blah. And here's the effect, da, 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 da. There is no codification. There is no law called the law of nullification. Proponents of nullification will cite Article 6 of the Constitution or the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, and they will say in Article 6 it says that only treaties and laws in pursuance of the Constitution are the supreme law of the land. The theory is the in pursuance thereof. They go, oh, well, if a law is not constitutional, if it is unconstitutional, it's not in pursuance, therefore it's not a part of the Constitution, therefore it's not the supreme law of the land, therefore we can nullify it. We can say, nope, we're not going to participate in that. The drug ideas or the Second Amendment sanctuary ideas or the immigration sanctuary ideas are good examples of those, where they go, you know what, the laws you've made are bad, we're just not going to participate in those, and they're not in pursuance of the Constitution, they are unconstitutional. Now, to understand legally the Article 6 line in pursuance thereof, or the 10th Amendment, which says all power not herein granted to the federal government, not reserved from the states, is reserved for the states or the people, to understand those are not codification of law. That is a philosophy. There's no remedy. There's no definition. There's no where can this be used? When can it be used? None of that. That is a philosophy. Philosophy is not law. It is just a manner by which we conceive or make laws. We have to use some standard when making our laws. Where do our laws come from? Most of our original legal system came from Judeo-Christianity, which was that the whole idea of biblical code. That was what we wanted to live by. Look, the Muslim worlds today, most of the Arab worlds and Muslim worlds live by the Quran. And under that, women are not people, or at least if they are people, they do not have rights. And so we believe, now when we were first founded, women didn't have a lot of rights. We've kind of come along and said, no, women are people, they have rights, they can own property, they can run for office, they can vote. All of that took a lot of work, and shout out to those girls and to those guys that got that done. But here in the Western idea, we have a philosophy that says all people are created equal. They all have the certain unalienable rights. Whereas other forms of founding philosophy don't have that idea. So what is the philosophy that we have? That was it. But that is not codified law. That is just a philosophy, and we have to separate those two out. Now, in order to understand nullification, there are two major concepts you have got to get in your brain. I'm going to show this right over here. Nationalism versus federalism, or federalism versus nationalism. This is supreme in order to understand nullification, and you have to come to terms with these two terms in order to fully define your position on nullification. So before I get going on talking about this, I want to give you just a brief history. If you go look up the term federal or federalist or federalism, you're going to get really confused. The term federal at the start of our country was a very popular word, and it was hijacked by multiple organizations, and they all used different definitions of the word federal, federalism, or federalist. And so in order to understand what it means, you have to separate it out. Now, federal was a term that was hijacked. It was used, there was a Federalist political party, like we have the Democrats and Republicans today. Federalist was a political party. Federalism was a philosophy of big government, of strong central government. Federalist versus anti-federalist was a constitutional convention philosophy as to what kind of government do we want. Federalism, the philosophy, the original philosophy was how our Constitution came to be. And Federalist versus anti-federalist at the Constitutional Convention was, do you want a strong central government or a small central government? So that term was hijacked. I am going to go over this briefly, and I will use terms that relate to us today, but are not entirely accurate. So go with me on this. The term federal believes that the Constitution is a compact or a contract between states, that the United States or the Union is between states. It also believes in a small central government, less central government, stronger states. That was the big one. We would equate it today loosely with the Republican Party or conservatism. Now, before you go screaming and yelling and go, I'm not a Republican, but I want to be able to have my sanctuaries. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying generally this is how we would do this. National or a national government believes that the Union, that the Constitution was between people, not between the states, that the people formed the national government. And so it was a union between people. It believes in a big, strong central government, lots of social programs, lots of taxing, lots of spending, big central government. We would generally equate it with the Democratic Party today or the concept of liberalism of modern day, or what we would call neoliberalism. Really, probably even more original liberalism as opposed to the neo stuff, because the neo stuff can get into the progressives, which doesn't really belong to either category. But I am going to refer to federalist and nationalist generally as big government for the nationalists and small government for the federalists, because I don't want to use the term Republican Democrat because that's not entirely accurate. But basically it's between the states or between the people, small government or big government. And that's generally how I'm going to address it. So why do we need to go over this? Why do we have to understand this term nationalist versus federalist? Because here's the question. Is our union, the United States, the Constitution, is it a compact between states? Are the states the party members to the Constitution? Or are the people the party members to the Constitution? Why does that matter? We're going to get into that for just a minute. Are we a national government, a constitution where the people are the party, or are we a federal government, a constitution where the states are the party? Are we a big government, national, people? Are we a small government, states, federal? That's important. Why is that important? Who can decide if a contract is broken? Well, if the contract states who can, that person can. But also, most people would agree the party members of a contract can decide if the contract has been broken. Let's get into an example of this. So here's our example. Let's pretend that you and I enter into an agreement. All right, I'm going to pay you. I agree to pay you. We're going to write a contract. See right here. I'm going to agree to pay you $100 per month, and you are going to protect my house and property. In the contract, we're both going to agree that Bob, remember Bob earlier? We're both going to agree that Bob can decide if the contract has been broken, and he can be the one to mete out disputes amongst the contract. So contract says, I am going to pay you $100 a month. You are going to protect my house and property, and Bob can decide if the contract is broken. So in this agreement, you represent the Constitution and the federal government. Bob represents the Supreme Court, and I represent either the people or the states. So let's take a look at this. So let's pretend everything goes along just fine for a while, and we've had little disputes here and there, and they've been resolved by Bob. But let's pretend then that all of a sudden a large wind comes up, a big wind, and blows a tree over from my neighbor's property, and it lands on my barn, crushes my barn gets totally destroyed. What do? I come to you and I say, you were supposed to protect my property and you didn't. You have to fix my barn. Well, you look at me and say, no, the contract says I'm supposed to protect your house and property, not your barn. You have to fix the barn, meaning me. So you're saying that I have to fix it. I'm saying you have to fix it. So, well, what does the contract say? Well, let's go to Bob. We got a dispute. We both go with Bob. Bob, what do we have to do? Bob looks at the situation and says, me, I've got to fix it. You don't have to fix my barn because, it clearly says blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm ticked off because now I'm paying you $100 a month. I'm starting to wonder, why am I paying you $100 a month? And now I've got to go fix my own barn when clearly I was paying you to protect my property. So now I'm upset at Bob and I'm upset at you. So here's the question, can I still decide that the contract has been broken? And if so, what can I do about it? Well, the easy answer is to say, well, what does the contract say? The contract is silent. It does not say whether I can decide or not. It just says that I agree to pay you $100. You agree to protect my property. Now, let's say that I go, that's it. I'm done. I don't want this subscription anymore. I want to end this contract. Am I allowed to? Let's go again back to the contract. It doesn't say. Now what do? We go back to Bob. Bob says, nope, you can't end the contract. Well, now wait a minute. You're not doing what I want, so I don't think this contract's worth. Do I have the right to end the contract? Most people would say yes. Now, let's pretend that in the contract it says, if I wanted to end the contract, I have to give you 30 days notice. And let's pretend that I'm so ticked off that I just say, nope, I'm not making another payment, not giving you any notice, I'm just ending the contract. Now, clearly, I'm in breach of the contract. And what do we do about that? Well, this comes to a term that we call remedies. So who gets to decide? We both agreed Bob could decide if the contract was broken, but we also, by nature of our contract, agree that you and I can decide if the contract is broken. The next question is, if it's broken, what can we do about it? What can the offended party do about it? In this case, I can cancel my subscription. Now, maybe there's time frames that I have to give or this or that or whatever, or make a payment. But the fact is if I don't like the agreement or I no longer think it's serving me, I can cancel the contract. This is the concept of nullification. Who is the party to the Constitution? The people or the states? Are we a national government or a federal government? I know I keep beating this one like a horse, but it's worth beating over because it determines who can decide if the contract's been broken. Now, further, let's get into remedies. If the contract is broken, what are the remedies? Remedies is a legal term for what you can do if your contract gets broken. That is a legal term called remedies. So let's take a look at that. Now, generally, remedies are defined in contracts, and they say, if the contract's broken, here's what's going to happen. Da, 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 da. I had this happen. I actually bought a business, and in the business, I said, look, if for some reason you've been dishonest and the business isn't quite what it's been proclaimed to be, and I get upside down, before I default on any payment, I can give the business back to you and you have to deal with it. That actually was a deal that I made. I had to execute that statement at one time. And, we got into a big disagreement and it was kind of an ugly gig. But the fact is that's a remedy. Now, here's the problem. The Constitution has 0 remedies in it. What if the contract doesn't have any remedies? The idea was we were going to let the courts figure out what the remedies are. Remember the courts? That's Bob. We were going to let Bob figure. What if Bob decides there are no remedies for you, for me, or you? He actually's ruled in your favor. Let's pretend Bob says there's no remedies for me, and I'm either the people or the states. It doesn't matter. Then what? What is the option then? If a government no longer protects its people and the people feel that way, or the states feel that way, what is the proper remedy? This is where we come to the idea of big government versus small government. Big government just says lump it. The only thing you can do in a big government is what was in the Declaration of Independence. Throw off your current government and provide new guards for your future safety. That's a nice way of saying civil war or revolutionary war, depending on who won. Remember, England thought we were in a civil war, not a revolutionary war. We won, so we say, oh no, it was a civil war, or it was a revolutionary war. So if the South had won the Civil War, they would have called it the Revolutionary War for the South. That's where they revolted and threw off their old form of government and made a new one. That was their idea. The only reason we won, it's called Civil War, is because the North won. And so it's called the Civil War, and the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, is called the Revolutionary War. So the winner determines what the name is, but the actual event is the same thing. If you are a big government person that believe that the Constitution was formed by the people, then you believe the only answer is civil war once it gets bad enough, or revolution. That's it. If you are a small government person, you believe that the contract is between the states, then nullification takes place before civil war does. So there is one more step on the small government people versus the big government people. Well, let's see what the contract says. Let's see if it can tell us. Over here, you'll see where it says in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, it says the United States shall guarantee to every person? No, every state in this union a republican form of government. This is not Republican, the Republican Party. A Republican form of government is a government of sovereign entities coming together to form a bigger government. That's what a republic is. That's where the Roman Senate came from. They were city-states that would send a senator off to represent them in the Roman Senate. That's how our government worked originally under the Articles of Confederation. There was one branch, and it was run by, there wasn't the two houses of Congress. There was only one house of Congress, and it was delegated by the states. The states were in control of that. That's how we started off. A republican form of government. So right there, everyone goes, see, nullification's true. We're a small government republic. No, that's not entirely true, because take a look at the preamble, which is as much a part of the Constitution as Article 4. The preamble says, we the states of the United States. Oh no, it says we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union, blah, 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 blah. The preamble says we the people. Article 4 says guarantee to the states a republican form of government. Our founders did not give us a nationalist, populist government of the people. They also did not give us a federalist union of states. It was somewhere in between. In Section 2, we will get into the debate in the Senate between Daniel Webster, as in like Webster's dictionary, Daniel Webster, that Daniel Webster and Robert Haynes. They were two senators. Senator Webster was from Massachusetts. Senator Haynes was from South Carolina. Senator Haynes was from a state that had slavery. Massachusetts was a northern state that didn't believe in slavery. They got into a massive duking it out scene. Here they are. There, you can see them right here. And we'll talk a little bit about them. Daniel Webster was the big government by the people, believed that nullification was not allowed. Robert Haynes was a small government by the states, believed in nullification. Robert Haynes was a slavist. Daniel Webster was an anti-slavist. Now, there is something very important we have to do here. Nullification has been at times with John C. Calhoun and Robert Haynes associated with slavery, and that's not fair and not right. Just because you believe in nullification does not make you a slavist. And just because you don't believe in nullification does not make you anti-slavery. There's a debate principle. I don't know. Maybe some of you guys that are real good debaters, put down in the comments below, what is that principle where something where you associate two things in a debate and then destroy the associated thing. And so then that theoretically destroys what you had associated it with. I kind of forget, and it's not right there on the top of my head. But this is the concept of nullification and slavery. A nullificationist is not a slavist. We have to be very fair and very right on this point. Robert Haynes, I don't know if he personally held slaves or not. He probably did, but I don't know that for sure. But Robert Haynes was pro-slavery. He was also a nullificationist. Daniel Webster was anti-slavery and did not own slaves. But that does not correlate those positions together. So keep that in mind. If someone goes, yeah, nullification is all about owning slaves. No, it's not. That is not fair and not right. If we're going to evaluate things, we have to be fair and right in our evaluation. This is where I love my favorite phrase. A thief may use a knife and a doctor may use a knife. Do not confuse the two because of the tool. Okay, a slavist may use nullification and an anti-slavist may not use nullification. Do not confuse nullification because of the concept of slavery. Okay, we get that. We understand that. Let's separate those in our mind. So what is the point with this? What is the point with all of this? Well, here's the point. If you are a federalist, if you are a states are the members to the constitutional contract that you want a small centralized government, a small federal government, and you want the states to have the most power. If you are a federalist or a small government person, no questions asked, nullification is legitimate. No questions. If you are a nationalist, if the people formed the Constitution and the federal government, no questions asked, you cannot nullify that. No level of government can nullify that. The only option you have is to go to civil war. So civil war is secession, and usually those go hand in glove, and they did last time, though they don't have to. Again, let's separate those two. But if you are a nationalist, a big government person, no questions, nullification is not allowed. If you're a small government person, no questions, nullification is allowed. So how did we start off as a country? We started off mostly as a federalist country. The states had the most power. The federal government was very limited and very small. That's how we started off. We began walking towards a nationalist form of government ever since our inception. And by the post-Civil War era, and particularly the 14th Amendment, by that time, we became mostly a nationalist form of government, where there was a lot of homogenation, and the central government became big. The federal government became really big. That's where Congress became way more important. We began to directly elect our senators, and we began walking towards a nationalist form of government, a big form of government. Now, lately meaning in the last 20, 30 years, we've slowly began walking back towards a federalist form of government in the form of sanctuary cities and states. And again, I look at those in most cases as a good thing, as going, that's the states asserting their rights. Now, here's the challenge. What kind of a person are you? Are you nationalist or federalist? But in asking that, I need to define what it was. You guys all remember the good old days when your grandma or your great-grandma or even your mom, when they would travel between states, there were checkpoints in between states, particularly California. Every single road in and out of California had a checkpoint. Every road in and out of some of the states of the South had checkpoints. You weren't allowed to take fruit, nuts, beans, whatever. You were not allowed to take those from one state to the next. My great-grandmother was coming out of Texas one time. They lived in California. They went and visited Texas. It's where they used to live. While there, she bought a big bag of Texas pecans. Texas, I don't know how the heck you raise big pecans. Everything's bigger in Texas, right? But you guys raise awesome pecans. By the way, Texas pecans, not a sponsor. Hashtag not a sponsor, but I am open to the option. I love Texas pecans. I make a great pecan pie, you guys. Oh my gosh. It's my great-grandmother's recipe. It uses more butter than you could shake a stick at. But she had a big bag of Texas pecans, and she's driving back to California. She gets to one state border, and the guy goes, "Do you got any nuts?" And she goes, well, of course I do. I've got Texas pecans. He goes, well, I'm going to have to confiscate those. She goes, no, you're not. She was a bit of a firebrand. She got out of the car, which was still in Texas, got out of the car, sat down right there and ate the whole bag of pecans because she's like, I know what he's going to do. He's just going to take them home and give them to his wife and he'll eat them. So my great-grandmother's a bit of a firebrand. But remember those days when there were checkpoints between the states? If you want states to determine how you live, there's going to be checkpoints between the states, and you won't be able to take Washington apples into Idaho, or Idaho potatoes into Oregon, or Oregon wheat into Idaho, or Indiana wheat and flour and corn into Iowa, and vice versa, and Nebraska, and all these different things, everything back east. You won't be able to do that. The state will determine mostly how you live, but the country will not be largely homogenized as it is right now. It will be states that get to decide. And hey, if you want to go smoke weed in Oregon, you certainly can. But if you try to bring that into Idaho, you'll be arrested. Or you might like to grow corn in Iowa, but if you take that over into Kansas or Kentucky, it'll get confiscated. That kind of stuff is a federalist form of government. Very small central government, and the states have the power. However, it does mean that your state can determine how you live. And what is easier to change, your state or the federal government in Washington, D.C.? Let's pretend you want to smoke weed. Let's just use that one. How long has the federal government been resisting letting go of their marijuana drug use laws? Now, I'm against drugs. I don't believe that this is a good thing, but I'm using this as an example. So we look at how long has it taken to change the federal government, and they still haven't changed as of the recording of this. And a lot of states have at least medicinal, if not recreational, marijuana usage. Oregon just opened up all drugs, for goodness sakes. But that is a federalist form of government. Your state gets to decide how you live, but there will not necessarily be this real, completely free flow of transportation between the states. You won't be, you can take your boat and go boating somewhere else and drive wherever. I mean, that's free. It's not like, no, you're in Idaho and you can't come into Washington. No, that's not what we're talking about. But we are talking about drugs. We're talking about fruit and beverages. We're talking about marriage. If California wants to recognize homosexual marriage and, a real conservative state, Mississippi doesn't. Does Mississippi have to? Under a federalist idea, the concept is no. Is that the kind of country you want? Or do you want a real homogenized government? A big federal government? Are you a nationalist? Nationalists say, the federal government should be big. The states should just be administrative arms of the federal government. The federal government should determine how you live. So our country is the same coast to coast. Is that what you want? And before you go say, yeah, that's what I want because look they're really left leaning right now, or they had been really right leaning. Remember, if it changes, how do you want to live? Before you go thinking that you like where things currently are and you want them to go more that direction, what if it changes? What if all of a sudden there's a massive resurgence of Christianity, of deep Bible Belt Christianity, real conservative Christianity, and all of a sudden we start passing laws and everything at the national level along those lines? Is that what you want? So if you pick up one side of the stick, you pick up both sides of the stick. So what do you want? What kind of a country do you want? Do you want a nationalist country where everything's homogenized, but change is really hard because there's 330 million Americans right now and we're growing, and that's a slow-moving ship to change? Or do you want the states to be able to determine how you live, but then you also have to live with those consequences, which means you probably won't be able to take pecans from Texas into California, and you won't be able to take your marijuana from Oregon into Idaho or whatever else. Do you want that kind of a government? That is the question. Nationalist, big government. Federalist, small government. Thank you for listening to this part one. We'll get into part two next, where we talk about the origin, the evolution, and the way it is currently, the origin, the history, and the evolution of nullification. So let's keep that in mind. What kind of a person are you, nationalist or federalist? And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching that video. If you like that, remember to give me a thumbs up and subscribe right up here. For other great content, take a look at our recommended video over here and see our playlist right over there. Remember to go to www.dustyfriday.com for great memes, news, videos, and my podcast available on all major platforms. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.